Now that we have covered the if function, we can move on to the more complex forms of the if function, which are the sumif, countif, and the averageif functions. So let's start with the sumif function. The sumif function puts a condition on the sum that performs sum if this condition is being met. So the first condition in front of us is sum of bags bought. So your condition is that you only want the sum of the bags. Now let's look at this data set over here. So we have names, and then we have products, their quantities, and the change the customers have received. So the condition in this case is our product, which is that we only need the sum of the quantities of the bags, not the scales, erasers, etc. Now let's perform the sumif function. You will type equals to sumif, select this function, and now you can see the arguments for this function over here in this bar below. The first argument is the range for the criteria. Just as we discussed, our criteria is the bag. So the range for the criteria is the product column. Select this, and then press comma to move on to the next argument, which is the criteria itself. So you can type bag in inverted commas like this, and this is your criteria. Then you put a comma again and move on to the next and last argument, which is the sum range, the range for which you want the sum to be performed. And we are taking the sum of the bags bought, which is the quantity. So we will select this column, and you will close your brackets and enter. So this is now the sum of the quantity of only the bags which have been bought. The next part is sum of erasers bought. Now we are just changing our criteria, and the rest of the function remains the same. Let's try this. Equals to sumif, and then you will feed in the criteria range again, which is the product. Select this, comma. Another way of selecting your criteria is writing it down in another cell like we already have over here. So I don't have to type in eraser, I will just select this cell. This means that this is the criteria. And then you put in a comma and give the sum range, which is the quantity, brackets close, enter. And you have the answer again. The last part of this question is the sum of change received for customers who bought erasers. Now we have changed the range for the sum. So instead of the quantity, we are changing the sum of change received. And the criteria over here is for customers who have bought erasers. Again, we have written the criteria over here, and we can perform this equals to sum if. You will select this, then you will select your range, the products, comma the criteria, the eraser, comma the sum range, which is now the change received column. So you will select this, brackets close, and enter. You have your answer. You may be warned that entering your criteria in both of these ways may be wrong. In this method, you may be typing in this word incorrectly. You may, with an error, type bags instead of bag. And now this sum is 0. That's because over here it's specifically bag and not bags. You may even mess up the spelling, which may lead to wrong answers. And even in this method, when you are writing the criteria in another cell, I may again write the wrong spelling, or I may type erasers. So if this is erasers, then the sum is again 0. So another way of selecting your criteria would be to select the cell directly from this range. Let's try this. I will erase the criteria from this function, and I will select the criteria from the dataset itself. The criteria in this case is eraser. I will select any cell which says eraser, and I will make it absolutely deferred. So I will press F4 and I have these two dollar signs, which means this is now absolute and it won't move around from its place. When I press enter, I get the proper sum. So this is the best way of selecting your criteria, because the spellings won't go wrong if you're selecting directly from the criteria range itself. A golden rule for performing these functions is to make your sum and average ranges absolute, which is again pressing the F4 key. So when you drag your function here and there, your formula ranges don't change. You can try this again in the same function over here. So this range could have been absolute when you select this and you press F4 and you make it absolute. Same goes with this range. You need to make this absolute as well. F4 and enter. Now if you drag this down, you can see that your ranges are still fixed, they are not moving around. Lastly, your arrays may not be equal, which means that your ranges which you are selecting may be different for both your arguments. Like in this function, you could have selected this range, and for the sum range, you could have selected this. Instead, you are including the header over here as well. This will give you the wrong answer. So always remember to select equal arrays. If I am selecting the header over here, then my header for this section should be selected as well, and the same goes if I'm not selecting the header, then my header should not be selected for this range as well.